Hello and welcome to the third video in this series, Mathematics of COVID-19. My name is Greg Einfeld and this video is presented by Lime Actuarial and Price Wizard. So you might recall our previous videos, we talked about how at the time I anticipated that the number of cases was peaking, and as we'll see in a moment, that has certainly been the case. And we talked about in the second video community transmissions, and it's good to see that those appear to have peaked as well. So let's have a look at the most up-to-date statistics on cases. And so you can see here the number of new cases in Australia, or at least reported cases, peaked at over 400 in late March. By just over a week ago, by the 12th of April, it was down to less than 50 per day. It's been fairly flat for the last week. I suspect that is largely because the government is now doing more testing than we were doing before, especially people who are in contact with other people that have already been confirmed as having the virus. So that's not necessarily a bad thing that we're seeing that flattening there. That should mean that soon we'll start seeing a reduction. So let's hope that's the case. Now, from time to time, people say to me, oh, but you can't just look at the number of cases because not everybody gets tested. I actually think you can look at the number of cases, but just to satisfy those people, this is the number of deaths, and we now have some reasonably significant data on deaths. Unfortunately, it'd be better if we didn't, but we have some data that tells a similar story. The number of deaths has peaked in the week commencing the 6th of April, about 2 weeks after the number of cases peaked, but that's exactly what you would expect to see due to the time lag between when you would be reported with a case and when those unfortunate people who don't recover pass away. So we're now getting our case numbers down to the point we can start to ask, how do we get out of this? Are we going to be stuck at home for the rest of our lives? What's the government's exit strategy and exit plan around everything that we're doing at the moment and all the restrictions that are in place? So the government has done some modelling, and this is roughly what the models show. I've taken away the numbers because I think it's more important to understand the concepts rather than specific numbers here. And what they're saying is if we had no restrictions at all, the number of cases, whether you model the number of cases, the number of deaths, the number of people in ICU, the number of people on ventilators, whatever it might be, you get a similar shape. Of course, the numbers are different, but the shape is the same over time. So if you have no restrictions, you get a peak up front, and then very quickly the disease spreads throughout the community and everybody's caught it that is going to catch it. So it then starts dropping off quite quickly as well. You reach this state of what's called herd immunity, where the majority of people, the herd, become immune and they can't catch it anymore. And then you could put in place moderate restrictions where you have a much lower peak. This is the blue line. It takes longer to get there because of the restrictions that are in place. And then if you put in place tighter restrictions, you have an even lower line again, and this is what we call the flattening of the curve, but it takes even longer to get to that peak. One of the things that's great in Australia is I think we all agree that the number of cases and deaths and people in ICU has come down much faster than anybody would have anticipated. So that's really good news, and we're probably closer to the peak at the green line, but we've got there faster as well than we might have expected, and now we're seeing it come down fairly rapidly. So that's all good news. Now, I started off by saying these are case numbers, but they could be the same graphs for ICU numbers. So one of the strategies, which I'm going to talk to you about more in a moment, is trying to manage restrictions so that the peak in ICU is equal to the number of spaces in ICU. So it would look something like this if we were measuring the people in intensive care on this chart. You might try and manage your restrictions in the blue line so that it fell just below the number of ICU beds, and that way everybody can start to get their business back to normal a little bit sooner, as long as you don't go above that black line. So the question that really intrigues me is, what is the government's plan here? And I think they have 4 different options for us to get out of this. So let's look at those. The exit plan. So first of all, is there going to be a vaccine? Now clearly if there was a vaccine available tomorrow, then everybody would take it. Certainly everybody who was at high risk would take the vaccine, and the problem would go away fairly quickly and we could all start living our lives again. Unfortunately, we're not at that point where we have a vaccine, or a cure for that matter. So we need to consider the other options. We could remove restrictions entirely, but then we would see the disease spread and we'd be back where the first line, the red line, was. So we don't really want to do that. The government could start loosening restrictions and get towards this point of herd immunity, where they're just managing the restrictions, tightening them a bit, loosening them a bit over time, until we get to the stage that most of us have had the disease, and that means it's not going to spread very much going forward. Now this is where most countries are going to end up. Sweden, interestingly, just came out in the last 48 hours and said they've now reached herd immunity. Most people in the country have caught it. They're claiming this as a victory. Not such a victory for the thousands of people that have passed away in the process, but they are claiming it as a victory nonetheless, because now they can start to get back to their normal lives. So that's certainly an option, and as I said, it's where most countries are going to end up. The final option is keeping the tight restrictions in place for longer and trying to eliminate the virus from Australia altogether. And you have to say we're heading in that direction. We had a peak of over 400 cases. It's been around on average 40 cases per day for the last more than 1 week. So we seem to be heading in this direction of elimination. The question is, can you actually get there? Can you get it from 40 cases per day down to 0 cases per day? So that's one of the big questions that remains unanswered. And then even if we do eliminate it, there's a flow-on effect of this, because if other countries reach herd immunity, Australians wouldn't be able to travel to those other countries, and we wouldn't be able to let any visitors in from those other countries, because they would still have the virus circulating within those countries. And as soon as you allow other people in, you potentially bring the virus into Australia as well. So this is a real challenge when some countries reach herd immunity and others are able to eliminate the virus completely. Sure, we might be able to travel to New Zealand, for example, or some of the Pacific Islands that haven't had the virus, but we wouldn't be able to travel to Asia or Europe or the United States, and we'd be locked off to the rest of the world essentially until a vaccine or a cure became available. Nonetheless, those are the options for the Australian government. It does appear to me that they are trying to go down the elimination path. They won't admit it, because I don't think they want to overpromise and underdeliver. But based on the fact that they're still maintaining very tight restrictions, it appears that that's the way that they are trying to go. And certainly New Zealand has said that that's the way that they're looking to go. So just keep in mind those restrictions are still there. We'll need to live our lives the way we have been for a little bit longer just yet, and I'll be back with another update soon. Once again, there's that chart again of where we're heading. And now it's me signing off. Thank you.